Hello students of Composition 2. Today we will be starting the class proper. This is our textbook, Weaving It Together. I hope you've gotten a copy for yourself. Before we start, I made an attempt at recording this. Actually, the lecture was pretty good. But in the editing process, I actually chopped off a couple minutes of it, which basically ruined it, so I just scrapped the whole thing. I have been trying to make the videos a little bit fancier and more entertaining for you. Maybe you've seen the book open at the beginning of the lecture. And my editing skills are not that great, and my fingers are a little bit probably too fat for the editing button on my phone if I use that, or I should probably start using a different process. But so far, I'm just using my fingers to manipulate merging the videos. It didn't work out very well this time. I accidentally clipped too much off. So this is where we are. We're doing round 2. So hopefully this is a better version, but I can't guarantee anything. A few students have asked me about what's going on with the uploads. Well, I give you the whole week. The period is open, but just because the period starts Monday morning doesn't necessarily mean that there's content up yet. And that's because I'm a normal person and I can't just record 6 lectures every Sunday and then upload them Monday. If I get far enough ahead, I will do that, but so far I haven't been able to do that. So there were 2 lectures uploaded Monday morning, and Tuesday morning there'll be another one, and throughout the week hopefully I'll start catching up and maybe get ahead. But you have to wait at least to your time slot. So Composition 2 is Tuesday morning or Thursday afternoon. So don't expect the lecture to necessarily be uploaded before your time during the week is up. That still gives you multiple days to watch a 30-minute video, so there shouldn't be an issue. You have to wait for things to be updated on the website as well. I'm not going to update the website and then say something is due tomorrow. I never do that. I'm going to give you a week at least in advance notice of homework or assignments all the time, especially in composition, because people have a tendency to panic and do their writing at the last minute, which is a terrible strategy, but it happens. But certainly I'm going to give you the chance, those of you who are responsible, I guess we should say, non-procrastinators, you'll have the opportunity to get your work done early. I got a couple emails of people getting a little bit antsy, jumping the gun. Just relax. I'm giving you a big window to watch the video, and I'll give you advance notice on all the assignments. There actually is no assignment this week. I'm sort of going to be pushing out, speaking stream conversation assignments every week for the first 5 weeks, and in sort of as a balance to that, the composition classes are going to have very little assignments for the first month. And then your assignments are going to come. There's a good reason for that. Basically, conversation class needs regular practice in order to improve. And I feel like composition class, you need to build a little bit and get more explanation and more practice first. The assignments themselves you need more instruction before you hand stuff in. Otherwise, what you hand in to me is not going to be very good quality. That's my experience, so that's my approach. Therefore, next week, we're going to have a Zoom lecture on Tuesday morning, okay? So at 10 o'clock next Tuesday, you won't be looking for an uploaded video. What you will be asked to do is to log on Zoom and join my personal ID. I will send you the Zoom ID lecture information. Sorry, I shouldn't say lecture information. Let's just use the correct terms. I will send you the meeting ID and the password, and you simply have to click on the link to join, and this will be a group email, or simply just put in the meeting ID, and when you're prompted for the password, type in the password, okay? And then you join. I will be taking attendance, and anybody who is not on the attendance sheet and doesn't belong in there will be kicked out. So don't share the meeting ID or the password with anybody else because they're not supposed to be there. Only people who are registered in the class will be allowed to join that Zoom meeting, okay? And anybody else will be banned. Now, what's important is that if you have an email address that you want me to send the meeting information to, the invitation, then please email me and let me know. If the email that you have uploaded onto the website in the Cyber Lecture information, I can see the email addresses and I'm going to send a group email through the Cyber Lecture system. If you want me to send it to another email, that's fine. But I actually prefer you to use the one that the information you've provided. But if it's not correct or you didn't give an email address, you have to let me know because otherwise you will not get the invitation. Okay, so make sure that the email information is correct. That's connected to your account. Otherwise, you're not going to get the invitation and you're not going to be in the class and you will miss the class, and as a consequence, your grade will suffer because of your lack of attendance. Okay? So you need to be punctual. I will be opening the meeting room about 5 minutes before we start, which is 9:55. And there will be a waiting room. So you can just join and just chill in the waiting room. And then at 10 o'clock, I'll admit all the people in the waiting room. I will check the attendance and make sure everybody is credited for being there who was supposed to be there. And then we will start the lecture. And I will explain to you more about the book, more about the assignments, and you can ask me questions that you have. And I will field those questions and let everybody know at the same time. And that should be fun. So for now, let's get into the first chapter of this book. And so you can get somewhat familiar with it before we do the Zoom lecture next week. Because I don't want only questions about the textbook. I would like to see questions that sort of build on what we're talking about today, which would probably involve, questions about what the assignments are going to be like and what you're going to do and so on. So now, the first chapter, the very first topic is called Right Brain, Left Brain. And let's start out by making something clear. One of the things about learning how to write well is learning how to analyze and be critical of the information that you take in. It's very important for you to process the information that you research and you receive in the world around you before you start doing any output. And that's one of the hardest things about writing, is that you have tons of information that's being gathered by your brain all day, and then you have to organize it and then communicate it to other people. It's more natural to speak. For me, it's more natural anyway, and for most human beings it is. It's something that almost everybody learns how to speak first. And then the writing comes later through instruction, practice, repetition, and informing strategy. But writing is something, speaking is something that all children do just simply by imitation, basically. And your brains are hardwired for that. To a certain extent, I think, and this is not a scientific theory, but it is a fact that the majority of people acquire their writing skills later. The vast majority of people do. So why is that? That's because your brain is not hardwired to do writing, so it's a harder process to transform all the information that you get into this thing we call writing. Combination of characters that form words, and these words form phrases, and those phrases form sentences, and those sentences form paragraphs, and those paragraphs form groups of paragraphs, and they in turn form, in this case, essays. So we want to get to the point, really that's why we do this Composition 2 thing in this format with this particular textbook, is because it's about understanding articles and how to put together your own writing by looking at examples. In every chapter, there's going to be a series of questions that sort of prep you for the content of the topic. And they ask you a series of questions. Sometimes we will do them and sometimes not. In the interest of speeding things along today, because I have a bad feeling that this lecture is going to exceed my 25-minute, 30-minute goal. I regularly made lectures that were too long, sort of accidentally last semester, and that's because I think I didn't focus on the main goals of the class, and I went off topic, as I do in lecture. Since we have 2 hours to throw around, it's a lot easier just to entertain. But when it comes to YouTube, I think most people's attention span starts to wither out, starts to weaken somewhere around the 20-minute or 25-minute mark. So I'm going to try and keep things at a manageable length for your sake, right? So you can sit down and do the whole lecture and listen and pay attention and make your notes. Please make notes, especially in composition. I'm going to mention things that are not in the textbook constantly. And if you want to get a good grade, it's all going to ride on how well you write for me. So I'm constantly going to give you small pieces of advice, which you can double check and rehearse, but really you just need to listen to my lecture and focus on the things that I emphasize and write down little pointers. And then look at the summary of your notes when you're going to write an assignment and say, okay, I got to keep these things in mind, and these are the things that I need to, this is how you do it properly, and this is what you should not do. And then you'll make less mistakes, and therefore your grade will be higher. That's how things work. So the chapter starts on page 4, and on page 5 they introduce the title, Right Brain versus Left Brain. Now, the questions that precede that article, they have a picture of penguins there, right? A whole bunch of penguins, and then there's one. I think this is just a mature emperor penguin. Nobody has really. I don't know how to find the answer to this, but from what the markings on the penguin, it's a type of penguin called an emperor penguin. I think it's a very beautiful bird. And these might be all emperor penguins, but the thing about penguins is they don't look really beautiful or different until they mature. They all kind of look like really funny looking fluff balls, and they grow up into these big fluff balls, and then when they mature and get their adult feathers and their plumage changes color, then you end up with this really sleek black bird that's got these kind of almost like sunset highlights around its neck. It's really a quite beautiful bird. Never seen it in person, obviously. Or maybe I shouldn't say obviously, but I've never been to Antarctica or South Africa or the bottom of South America. This is National Geographic, so that's where I saw emperor penguins before. There's 4 questions below the emperor penguin, who's looking quite distinctive amongst all the other less mature penguins. Is 15% of the population left-handed? Do intelligent people have heavier brains? Are right-handed people generally good at math? And do Chinese people believe that there are 4 basic shapes of faces? Now, there's no real way to know whether the answers should be yes or no to any of these questions. It's really just about using your intuition. And you can't really have good intuition, I think, with these kinds of questions unless you have a lot of knowledge. Who knows if it's 15% or 25% or 20%. Just going out on a limb, left-handed people are, as you know, very uncommon compared to right-handed people. So it is true that around 15% of the population ends up being left-handed. There have been punishments for people who are left-handed, and it's a right hand. I've heard this expression many times. It's a right-handed person's world. It's a righty's world. When it comes to sports and stuff, we're much more flexible. Like we kind of, in some sports, you really want lefties. For example, everybody's favorite baseball player. No, I'm just kidding. It's not even my favorite baseball player, but a very famous baseball player in Korea who plays in Toronto, not for the soccer team, but for the Blue Jays, is Liu Hyunjin, and he is a left-handed pitcher. And those pitchers often do very well simply because they're less common, and it's harder for the hitters who are right-handed to hit off a lefty. I hope I got that right. But they pitch from a different side, so it's harder for the batters to hit a lefty. So, this is an advantage. So you need more left-handed people for certain things. Do intelligent people have heavier brains? That sounds like it could be true, but you have to remember, we don't measure intelligence by how heavy your brain is. Intelligence is measured mostly by how you perform at tasks, or what knowledge you possess, how good your memory is, etc. Right? We also measure by education. There's various metrics that we use for measuring intelligence. But for example, if you have a really good sense of smell, that requires a lot of brain power for your senses. Like if you have very sensitive tactile senses, which is touching things, or you have a very sensitive sense of smell, or your hearing's especially good, like a superhero. You can hear, or your eyesight is really acute. All of these things require brain power. They require a certain amount of space and energy from your brain. They do not. They're not reflected in an intelligence test. So of course not, right? Certain animals have gigantic brains because they have gigantic bodies. The biggest brain in the world is not the human being. It's just our brains are very big in proportion to our size, right? Human beings have the biggest brains relative to the size of their body. But bigger animals have bigger brains than us. So you don't measure intelligence by brain weight. No, that's not true. Are right-handed people generally good at math? That's what they claim in the article, so the answer is yes. But there's a lot of, generally is the key word there. Specifically, no. Individually, no. Generally, even if a psychologist does a test and they have thousands of people and it turns out that 5% more of righties are better at math than lefties, then this is true, because that's a trend. So you got to be careful, how questions are worded. Quite tricky there. Generally, yes. You can't deny that if that's what the research has told us. Do Chinese people believe there are 4 basic shapes of the face? Again, according to the article, yes. There are various types of faces. Actually, it turns out that there's more than 4 shapes. But according to the article, they do believe that shapes reflect a person's personality. That comes later in the second article, so we won't talk about that today. We'll leave that for the Zoom lecture. But that is going to be the second part of the chapter. The second topic is about faces, so we won't talk about that now. But it does say in the second part of the chapter, it says there are 8 basics. So that's wrong, because it's the wrong number. Excuse me. However, I also have had many Chinese students, so it's also important to point out that some of my Chinese students said, I never even heard of that. Let's remember, China is a very big country with dozens of different types of people in different regions. China is like, imagine Europe was one country. If you say the EU, and you say the people in the EU believe this, Germans would say, well, we don't believe that, and Spanish would say, well, we believe that, and then the Belgians would say, we don't believe that either, and then the Italians would say, oh, no, that's right, the Spanish are right, and so are we. There's going to be differences region by region, so it's kind of misleading to just say the Chinese believe in anything. when there's so many different types of people in China. We do tend, actually, as people from the, what we call the Western world, whatever exactly that means, but North America and Europeans have a tendency to look at all of East Asia as sort of one monocultural thing, which is, since I've lived in Korea for 13 years, something that you should never do. Koreans don't appreciate that. North Koreans, South Koreans don't appreciate that. Japanese don't like it either. Manchurians don't like that. Northern Chinese or Southern Chinese, people from Hong Kong, people from different parts of China are all gonna not have the same cultural beliefs, right? China has its own culture, but it is very diverse. And I think that's something we should recognize and that China should also be proud of. So, when it comes to left-handed people get this reputation for having some sort of special intelligence. It's almost like a myth. It starts out, this is how the article starts out, is just by, bringing you in, by hooking your attention. So we're going to talk about this a little bit. I want my students who are writing for me to realize that really I have to argue that the most important part of your writing is the beginning. Simply because if somebody has no choice to read your writing, like me, that's fine, I suppose. I'm going to get to the middle and find all the good stuff, or I'm going to get to the end and then you're going to have a really great conclusion, and that's fine. However, in the real world, having a weak opening, having no hook, or an introduction that's not attractive is a big problem. Because let's say you're writing in a newspaper, or you're writing on the internet and you're writing a blog. Let's say you're writing a paper and you want more people to read it. If there's no good points, no strong position, there's no entertainment or whatever, there's nothing for the person to latch onto. They're just going to stop reading and keep going until they find something better. So I think we have to focus on that somewhat, even though you can save your best for last if you like. But I think the introduction, the beginning, there has to be some sort of strategy. There has to be some sort of technique, which all of my students try to do it in various ways. And I try to sort of coach you, are you using humor? Are you using a quote that's familiar? Or are you putting into context? Are you trying to shock people? It doesn't matter really what you do, just do something. Here, what they do is just name a bunch of famous people that people generally pay attention to, just because it's called name dropping. They just throw a bunch of names in there. You recognize the names, so you keep reading. Leonardo da Vinci, everybody knows him. Okay, now you've got my attention. Prince William, I know that guy too. He's got a few kids, and he's in line to be king after his father, after his grandmother. And Julia Roberts, who is a really famous actress, and probably before your time, but she's still fairly well known for certain roles, especially in Korea. Everybody knows Pretty Woman. They all have something in common. What is it? They're all left-handed. Today, about 15% of the population is left-handed, but the question is, why are people left-handed? The answer may be in how the brain works. Okay? That is, if there's nothing else good in this article, that's a good start, because I want to know how the brain works. I like those celebrities. They sound very smart and successful, and I want to know how the brain works so I can determine how my brain works and how other people's brains work, so I can be successful in my life too. So that's a great start for just getting people's attention. That's what we would call a hook. Okay, so normally we would go through the article in class, but I would like you to read it on your own. I'm not going to read the whole thing out loud to you, but I do want to draw your attention to the fact that sometimes the article doesn't really provide a whole lot of evidence for what they say. So they make these things, they claim these things, and they make these arguments, but really, who knows if it's true or not? And that's something that I don't want you to do. So We are analyzing, not just imitating. I'm not asking you to, parrot everything that is in the article. You might choose certain things to imitate, like I said, to make a good introduction, to make a good first paragraph to get somebody to keep reading. But once they get into the body and they start going into the details, there is a lack of specific details supporting their points, okay? So their main argument is left side brain, somebody who's dominant, right brain dominant versus somebody who's left brain dominant has different capacities and different strengths, okay? But really, that's not really explaining how the brain works. That's what they claim they're going to do. They're just telling you one aspect, which is some of your skills are related to which side of your brain is stronger. But there are people who are sort of like ambidextrous, just like your hands. Some people can throw and sort of have a balance between their two sides. And the same goes for your brains. You can be very dominant on one side or the other, or you can be more balanced. So the article doesn't really go into the science too much, and I'm not going to go into the science because neuroscience is not my specialty, far from it. I'm more interested about the logic here. So they don't go and prove what they're trying to say. But when you express yourself and you make claims, I want you to prove it to me using some details, facts, research, statistics, and ones that are not something that you pulled out of the air, but something that you found or something that you're sure about, so that you can persuade me that you're right. So you have to go into these articles with a certain amount of you have to be careful, and you have to be critical, and you have to be skeptical. So don't believe everything you read just because it says National Geographic on the front. Doesn't mean it's all fantastic stuff and it's all correct. That's why we constantly revise textbooks and we update them, because information is always being improved, proved, disproved, and improved. Okay? So you can see on page 7, it goes through a whole bunch of vocabulary, and then it asks you to answer questions in complete sentences. Like, do you know somebody who's always punctual? Who is she or he? Yes, I know somebody who's always punctual. That is my mother. My mother is always punctual because she thinks it's bad manners not to be on time. And she thinks it's also respectful to be on time because other people wait for you, and she doesn't like people to wait. So I'm pretty paranoid about that. I don't think it has anything to do with my left brain dominant or right brain dominant thing. And so I disagree completely with this article, because this is a product of my perhaps genetics, if my mother and I are similar, but it doesn't have anything to do with being right-handed or left-handed. It has to do with my environment and my personality. I get really nervous about being late. One of the reasons is because I worked in a factory and I actually overslept a couple times. And when you work in a factory, you have a card, and I had to be there at 6 a.m. And if you swipe your card 1 minute late, they remove 15 minutes of your pay. And then the foreman, the plant manager, or whoever is your boss comes to see you and ask you why you're late. Even if you're just a minute late, it doesn't matter. You're supposed to be there before 6 o'clock. And everybody would basically, all the workers would clock in like 5:50, 5:55. And a few times I forgot to clock in, and then the manager would come around and be like, Jeremy, you're here, but the computer system says you're not. And I was like, oh my God, I forgot to swipe my card. And he was an Italian American who moved to, his name was Dominic. And he used to yell at me when I did that. These things kind of traumatized me. So I try to be, when I teach class at Chungnam, I usually go to my office like 20 minutes early. And I sit in my office until 2 minutes before, and then I walk down the hallway, and then I come right in the door right as the clock changes to 10 o'clock or whatever the case may be. So Do you know someone who is always punctual? Who is she or he? I know someone who's always punctual. It is my mother, and she does that because she wants to be respectful to other people and not make them wait for her. Okay? That's a good sentence or two sentences. You have to answer these with complete sentences. When I ask you to do this on the exam or I ask you to do your homework, you must write complete sentences. It says right there. B, answer these questions with complete sentences. Okay? So there's going to be two types of assignments, just to give you the heads up, because one student in particular seemed a bit nervous about assignments for Composition 2. One of them is going to be answer the questions in the book about the topic in the chapter. And the other type of assignment is going to be, I give you a topic to write about, and you write a paragraph that's about a page long or multiple paragraphs. It's something I call a response paper. I give you a topic and you have to respond to my question or my instructions by writing a really short 1 page or 1 page and a half sort of length paper. So we will do that later though. And next week we'll have a Zoom lecture. So I will be able to go over the details I will be able to go over everything in more detail because I will have more time. Right now, my 30 minutes is up, and as I promised, I'm trying to keep it to a reasonable length. So this is it for today, and we will talk about the rest of Chapter 1 next week. There is no assignment, so you can relax about that. Just read this, just read the textbook, read the topic. You don't have to do the questions, and watch this video. And that's all you're required to do until next week when I get to talk to you in real time. And I look forward to that, okay? So have a good night or afternoon, morning, whatever time it is you watch this. And I will see you next week. Take care.